This is the Gomaluku podcast.
Oh man, good to see you.
Good. Yeah, you too. Yeah.
It's
This is a new experience for me.
Yeah, is it how is the pandemic been treating you?
Yeah, it's been okay. I mean, I've mainly been working at home. Our office opened a couple of months ago, and I've been in a couple of times. It's nice going into the office.
Right.
It's really nice to see people, and it's very chilled. There's not many people, and it's quite a nice atmosphere. But I have found it, like, as time goes on, I start getting quite bored of. It's just every day looks like the next. It's not easy and not sort of. It's great for the environment that we're not traveling, but I miss meeting people. Like, all those chance meetings you would get at the Permanent Forum or MRIP and things like that. That's why I go to those meetings. I go for the chance meetings, for bumping into people, chance discussions. You don't get that on Zoom or on webcasts. So yeah,
no,
I find that a bit
not.
of a struggle.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, I almost just launch this into the podcast. Yeah, just to confirm. So you said you have a hard out at 5 your time?
Yeah. Yes.
I'll make sure that we end way well before that.
Okay. Cool.
So that it's so you don't have to get worried about that. So because you're still based in London, right? This now in London.
Yeah.
How is that going? Because I now learned that they're going to extend the lockdown in a way over there.
That was just today. Yeah, like 4 weeks, at least 4 weeks. Yeah, which is not a surprise. I mean, I think we were doing pretty well, but yeah, recently it's not been so great, and it's very mixed across the country as well. There's some parts of the country where it's much worse. So yeah, it didn't come as a huge surprise, to be honest.
Right.
I don't know. I think we're stuck with this for quite a long time.
Yeah. But
and we have it. I always feel like I will always complain about the pandemic situation in the UK, but when I think of like the rest of the world and particularly the inequality in distribution of vaccines and so on, it's really criminal. It's outrageous. So I always feel like, okay, it's not a great situation, but seriously, we're in a better position than many countries. So I have to make sure I don't complain too much.
Well, it is. Well, yeah, I see the as a reflection, right? Yeah, as like we're looking at how the situation is, and yeah, obviously this it only. The funny thing is, and I say it's funny, but it's actually tragic. Like, it only exacerbates like the inequality that's already been there. It just adds another layer on top of it, and which is
totally
scary to think about, like how this will all play out. How this, because we're only in the early stages of all this. But how will this all play out, and if we're going to recover, if there is a post-COVID situation, then how will that look like? And like the thing that I hear from indigenous communities all around the world is it varies. It is the vaccine coverage is one layer. Another layer on top of that is the because that's only like starting to roll, actually, the vaccine coverage. But before that, you had these emergency laws that was a concern to a lot of indigenous peoples, and then medical health coverage. So there's all these layers actually that make this even more complex than it was already complex. But now it just, in a way, and this is just how I think about it, it did is in a way a good thing. And I know that I'm going to that not a lot of people will agree with me, but in a way one good thing about it is that it exposed some situations. It exposed inequality and exposed that that was already there, and that you could see the exacerbation of it. So that there's so many things that are ongoing right now that that and it's not you can comparing, because there should be, like, if there's like the pandemic does, like the COVID-19, it doesn't discriminate, right? It doesn't discriminate. And what I find fascinating is that though the virus itself, it doesn't discriminate, it sure looks like there is discrimination in terms of the treatment of it, in terms of the vaccine coverage and everything else. And man, if you hear like stories, I had a sister from the Yawanawa in the Amazon the other day on the podcast, and she was telling me about like this, how and then obviously it's Brazil is not, like, let's say, not on our Christmas list when it comes to indigenous peoples, but like if you hear everything that's going on, it's for UK is a cakewalk compared to what's going on what's going on in Amazon. So it is, at least I think what you not only the work that you're doing, but what you just now, like I don't see it as complaining, but it's just like knowing that there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between globally between countries, communities, and everything else. Yeah, just like
that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
No, I agree totally. Yeah. I mean, the big question is, it is, as you say, it is highlighting the grotesque inequalities and how this basically impacts on, not just indigenous peoples, but people, ethnic minorities as well. People who are poorer, who can't choose not to go to work. They can't choose to stay at home. We spoke to people in Democratic Republic of Congo who couldn't afford to buy masks. Right. And then they were getting fined or arrested for not wearing a mask. I mean, it's really, it is absolutely appalling. But the big question is, are we going to learn from that and do, as you say, do things differently and in the post-COVID world?
Right.
I really hope we do. I really hope it's a wake-up call for people, because it has, on a massive global scale, highlighted very, very clearly the massive inequalities.
Yeah.
And it just between the peoples, like within a country, like indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, but also between countries, rich and poor, around the world.
Right.
It's grotesque. It's really grotesque. And the question is, do we do something about it?
Right. And I can imagine that the already heavier workload that you have as a IP rights researcher advisor for Amnesty International, that it only piled up even more or made it more complex since COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, we sort of like did a panic in reaction to the pandemic. We did a sort of panic, well, not panic, but we just really scrambled to repivot a lot of our work. Like, I mean, Amnesty as a whole, repivot a lot of our work towards COVID-19. And in a way, that was useful for the sort of Indigenous rights desk, because we got more resources. So I've now got two really amazing colleagues who are working with me, Rena and Leah, on a project we've got called Indigenous Voices in the Pandemic, which is reaching out to Indigenous folks around the world and basically interviewing them about their experiences, asking them what the situation is, trying to get their voices out there. I mean, obviously we had Khalid Sai's great report on Indigenous peoples in the pandemic. So we're not trying to duplicate that, but we maybe, that was a very UN sort of document, and we're trying to sort of do something, with a lot of trying to, maybe sort of get a bit more like media focus and using a bit of social media and that kind of finding different ways to get the information out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, in that sense, it was it was a massive challenge, but yeah, we also got more resources for it. So yeah, it has, in a way, it has helped. On the other hand, we can't do a lot of the work that we were doing before. Like, we can't do field research. We can't go and travel to countries and do field research. We're trying to find other ways of doing that. Obviously, there are other ways of doing research. So yeah, it has been a challenge.
Right. I think, well, the report of the special rapporteur is very helpful. It is, if not for only for the reason that it's been, I think, the number one report in terms of numbers of submissions. That is 150 plus submissions from Indigenous peoples that sent in their reply to the questionnaire and provided input. But you also see that there's and I think that the work, because to put it bluntly, Amnesty International is a brand, right? It's very well known around the world that Amnesty International has the ability to also reach people beyond the UN, because you gotta know like what that there is a United Nations. Well, people know that there's United Nations, but then you need to know there's a special rapporteur, and then that you can, like, there's a lot of layers of complexity that is added to the work. Is good. It's very important. However, like, you need to know it for a lot of Indigenous peoples, and you must know that as well, is that it is a very gray area for a lot of, if you consider the 476 million Indigenous peoples all around the world, I would say like maybe 1% knows what's going on within the UN. So then there's the 99% actually that we need to reach out to. And I think mapping out and trying to find out, like, how has COVID-19 impacted or exacerbated current situation of Indigenous peoples, I think the work of Amnesty International can be very important in all that. So it is trying to fit. It is not duplication. I like to see it as a piece of the puzzle, right? We're trying to figure out, like, what in the world's going on, and then the UN, the Special Rapporteur, has a piece of the puzzle, and I think the Permanent Forum has done something as well as mechanism on the rights of Indigenous people. And there's within that triangle of the UN mandates, there is a little bit of overlap, 100%, because if you know about the Permanent Forum, you know about MRIP, and you know about a Special Rapporteur. So there's a lot of overlap. However, I think the work of Indigenous peoples, as well as the knowledge and the capacities of Indigenous people's rights or human rights, it needs to go beyond the usual suspects, like the people that know about the UN. And like, I think Amnesty International, what you're doing is can be super helpful. Are you in what stage are you at? Are you trying to still mapping out? Are you still trying to canvas Indigenous peoples all around the world?
Yeah, we're still in the process of doing interviews. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, let me know if you need some email addresses and some people, and I'll.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. We did it when the whole COVID-19 started, and I think that was in April last year. Because you also see, like, and you can also see that in retrospect, obviously, but you did see Indigenous peoples were very uncomfortable with webinars and online, because we also said, MREP, we need to go, it needs in person. And yes, we need to have in-person meetings. But in terms of our coordination and trying to figure out what was going on, you did see online events, webinars that were super regionally focused. North America, Latin America, Asia, Africa. And there was not much of an overlap, whereas the strength of Indigenous peoples always has been the solidarity across regions. It was the being able to work together on multiple levels and across multiple regions. And started this online series, a very low threshold, informal thing, and invited Indigenous peoples from all around the world, right? Like, this is a live stream. We just talk for 2 hours and let's see what happens. And it was quite interesting to see, like, the overlap, as in that just what's going on in New Zealand, which they're super aware of and concerned about. that the regulations that give the police a little bit more power to go into people's homes, privacy regulations and everything else. And then you had all these other situations that were emerging around the world. So it is. I think we still have not figured out the entire puzzle yet. I think that's what I'm trying to go to is that we were still we're trying to figure out like how will this impact not only our communities but also our work internationally. MRIP per inform, like how we've experienced a virtual per inform. Well, I can tell you this: it's not many Indigenous peoples liked it. For obvious reasons, like, yes, there's a lot more reach. You can reach more people. However, participation is a super important thing. And you saw that, it is not as participatory as an in-person meeting. So we're still also trying to figure out like what do we want and what is going to happen? Like, what is the post-COVID-19 world in terms of MRIP, Human Rights Council, and all the other meetings? Whereas the biggest strength of if solidarity across regions is the biggest strength, then having boots on the ground or being on the ground in UN meetings is something that Indigenous people are super good at. And if you take that element away by going virtual, we're still trying to figure it out. Like, and I think it is virtual is going to stay 100%. It is going to stay to a certain degree. However, it is just my hope that when it comes to decision making, that institutions like the UN and the EU, they go back to in-person meetings, because you do need like face-to-face interaction, having you and me sitting across the table, having a cup of coffee, and like, hey, Chris, what's going on? And that I think that is still important. So I hope that there's trying to trying to bring that reality into reality, that's trying to make use of reach use virtual for reach. However, when it comes to decision making, that we do go back to in-person meetings, and that's what a lot of Indigenous peoples feel. That's what I gather.
For sure. And it's also, I mean, it's not just the UN. It's also sort of like in terms of like, for example, the way we do our research, like, I mean, I've always relied on WhatsApp and Facebook to get in contact with activists on the ground and to find out what's going on. But you definitely find that it's the younger generation of Indigenous activists who are using social media a lot, very conversant with that. They're more likely to speak English. But you also need to get in touch with the elders of communities, whichever communities, wherever in the world. They need to be in the loop as well. I mean, and quite often what you'll find is that there is a group of people working within a community. There's a group of people, there's the young activists, there's the elders, and they're all talking to each other. It's not like, you're hearing a different story, but it does affect your research if you only speak to the younger activists who are using WhatsApp and you're not speaking to the elders of the community. That makes a big difference. And that whole digital divide thing, I think, is quite important. And that was there before the pandemic, but it's got worse now because everything is online.
Yeah, 100%. I agree that it exposed a lot of things. The whole situation. You talk about the digital divide, and also that now, like, it is, and which is what I'm afraid of, is that the one that is the most social media savvy, will get the upper hand. So I'm not saying that Indigenous peoples or most of Indigenous peoples or the majority are using it for bad things. However, you do want to have an accurate reflection of any situation, if it's in a community, globally, and everything else. And I think the one that is most media savvy, or not media savvy, but like puts out the most on the internet, usually gets the attention, right? Like, oh, that person is willing to share the most things. However, when it comes to mapping out what is really going on, you do have to, like I said, like, all right, are you reaching out to elders? Like, and most elders don't go on Twitter or Instagram or any of those platforms. They sit down and they talk, and you won't be able to put that into like a 7-second Instagram story or a tweet or something like that. Like you do have to sit down with them, and which is also important because there's a lot of knowledge in there. So I am already trying to figure out, like, how do we make sure that everyone is included, or that you get the insights and the voices of these people. So I don't know. It is something that I'm afraid of, actually, as well. I always look at it like, will it help or hurt the movement? Whatever is going on, and the movement has always been a fine balance, not a balance, which makes it seem very binary, but it's a mix of elders, women, youth, activists, experts, like, so you have this very well sophisticated mix of people, and just trying to figure out, like, with this whole added element layer of online, trying to figure out, like, how that can be brought back. Anyway, just a weird rant on indigenous peoples versus the internet, which is we've been thinking about lately. Anyway, how did you end up, by the way? How did you end up with Amnesty International? Sorry to pivot.
No.
Bluntly.
That's fine. Well, I before Amnesty, I was working with minority rights group, who also based in London, also an international NGO, but much smaller, and focusing on minorities and indigenous peoples. But kind of, I guess, I mean, I think they're sort of changing, but I think at the time when I was there, there was probably the equilibrium more towards minorities. So that was more what I was working on. I was with them for 13 years, so quite a long time. And I think I sort of around 2013, I sort of came to the point where I was thinking, 13 years with an organization, great organization, love them, do amazing work, especially the legal cases, but also lots of other really interesting media work and training work and stuff. I really, really respect them. But I just thought, it'd be good to have a change, good to do something a bit different. And Amnesty, I mean, one of the things that attracted me about this particular job was that it's really it's almost 100% either research or it's like policy work, looking at sort of international standards and how they should be implemented, and do they need to be improved? Do we need to engage with this process at the Inter-American Commission on improving, developing a new standard on indigenous people's rights, or do we need to get involved with the World Bank revising their safeguards? I like that kind of policy work and the research. So I guess that's why I moved to Amnesty, and that was like beginning of 2014 that I moved to Amnesty.
Has researching on indigenous people's rights, has that been on your path, as in that's what you wanted to do?
What you mean, since I was a kid?
Let's start with that. Like, what did you want to become as a kid? That's always interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I had a clue when I was a kid, but I do remember I was like, I think one thing that was throughout my childhood was I was totally fascinated with, like, the world, not just the village that I lived in or the city nearby or the country, but the world. And I remember, like, when I was a kid, there was a newspaper offered this like special supplement that you had to send off for on the UN, and I was like, wow, I thought the UN was the most fascinating thing in the world. I thought, wow, this organization where all the countries of the world come together and discuss stuff. I thought, now I've been to UN meetings, I realize how wrong I was. But yeah, I just thought it was such an amazing idea. So I sent off for that and learned about the UN. So I think I had that. I was always, fascinated with the world. And I kind of, I was quite good at languages at school. So I ended up studying languages, and I went to university and I studied languages. So I think I always had that sort of outlook of wanting to discover the world. But the human rights thing hadn't yet completely formed, but it started to sort of come up at university, and I thought, it'd be interesting to get involved in human rights. And when I finished my degree, I kind of tried to work out ways of getting into that. I traveled around a bit. I mean, now, when we look back now with sort of, I don't know, I mean, it's hard to say better knowledge, but, now people are starting to talk more about like voluntarism and white saviorism, and the sort of the dark side of trying to go out there and save the world, which I don't think I really understood at the time. So I kind of went backpacking around Latin America, and I tried to find some voluntary work that I could do, and eventually I ended up working in Guatemala, and this was when the peace accords were just being signed. So it was like late 90s.
Yeah.
Mid 90s, around 95, I think. And they were just about to sign the peace accords, and there were indigenous communities who had basically fled into the mountains or into the Petén jungle, basically to hide, and there were displaced communities as well who'd fled somewhere within Guatemala or who'd gone to Mexico. So the displaced communities were coming back. The indigenous communities were wanting to come out of hiding and just live a normal life. But they basically said, we want international observers in our communities because we still don't trust the army.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was it was all done so ad hoc and unprofessionally. I mean, it was just a few little tiny organized NGOs sprouted up in London, in Copenhagen, wherever, basically trying to recruit international observers. And people went out, like I went out, with almost zero training. I mean, when I look back, I just think, wow, how green I was and how little I knew, and how little I knew about what I was throwing myself into. I remember I was given a report on the Maya of Guatemala and told to read that, and that was basically my preparation. So I did that. For 5 months, I was in the Petén in a very remote place, kind of in the jungle.
How was that like?
Community. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience. I mean, the weird thing about it was my job was just to be there. So I just sort of turn up and I'm like, okay, what do I do? And they're like, well, you don't do anything. You just, But I mean, that was crazy. So eventually, like, I tried to get involved. I ended up working in the school, teaching maths in the school, teaching a bit of reading and writing, and tried to get involved with the sort of like foraging trips out, to find wood and stuff like that. But it was fascinating. It was really fascinating. It was a very it was a real eye-opening experience, and it was just being there in that place for such a long time, and really just being able to get to know the natural world around me, and to listen to people's stories. People would obviously tell the stories of what had happened to them during the Civil War, which was obviously, really, I mean, it was sobering and really, very sad, really sad stories, really awful stories. But it was a big learning experience, definitely a big learning experience.
What was the biggest lesson that you think you've learned from that period?
I mean, in a way, I guess because I was very aware of how naive I was and how uninformed I was when I went out there, I think I realized the value of knowing what you're going into and doing your research, and just really, and maybe having a professional organization behind you who can actually give you the right preparation. for an experience like that. I mean, it all worked out okay, but I think with my sort of level of naivety and the lack of knowledge that I had, maybe I could have put people in danger by saying the wrong thing, or you know, I don't know. I mean, there was one thing that people impressed upon me a lot was when you go out of the community, you don't just blab to anybody about what you've seen and what's happening in the community. I mean, that was made clear to me, and obviously I understood that. But I think it's just that sort of level, that understanding that you can't just throw yourself into these situations without preparation. You do actually have to know what you're doing.
Right. What was it? So you've been being there for a while, hearing all these stories. Weren't you afraid that it would really get to you, like emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, for sure. I mean, that is one. I think that's one of the hardest things in human rights. I think it's really hard to deal with, and the thing is, like, I think what people tend to do is, and I've always tried to sort of be aware of this. I mean, we had a couple of years ago, we had 2 suicides at Amnesty. And as a result of that, we had a massive sort of inquiry into well-being and stress and psychological impact of the work and stuff like that. And since then, we've had a much better support. Like, we've got a counselling service, and people are on the lookout for that kind of thing. But I think the impact of this sort of emotional trauma is really, I think it's like under the surface. You never really see it, and I think. And also, you kind of think as well, it's happening to me, it's happening to this person. So you suppress it, and you also belittle it, because you think, I can't complain. Like, I wasn't the person who was tortured or arrested, or my children weren't killed in front of my eyes. So I can't. I don't have any right to complain. And there's a truth in that. Obviously, there are degrees of suffering, and the degree of suffering which comes from hearing a story is nothing. You can't compare it to what happened to the people who went through that experience. But then I think that maybe leads you into a false path of not paying attention to it and not worrying about it and belittling it and not caring about it, whereas actually that it's cumulative, and you're hearing that day after day in your work, year after year, and it probably is having an impact. And we don't want our human rights activists to burn out. We don't want to lose people. It happens all the time. People are burning out all the time. But when that happens, basically you lose people who have years and years of experience, and that that's not. Yeah, it's not great. But I don't know exactly the solution to this. It's a very under-researched area. Actually, I think quite a bit of research has been done into the trauma of people who work in the humanitarian field.
Right.
But very little on the human rights field, which sometimes is similar to humanitarian, but sometimes different. If you're reading you might be based in London, constantly watching videos, constantly reading reports. You're not on the ground, so people think, oh, they're fine. They're not actually seeing, a mass grave or talking to somebody who's got visible signs of torture. So they must be fine. They're back in London. But I think you can also experience that sort of damage at second hand.
Right.
So I think that area, it has been under. There has been some. I think it's Columbia University in New York has done a really interesting piece on resilience and well-being in the human rights field. But it's definitely under researched.
Right. Is there currently I would imagine that there is some kind of a program maybe, or a support group that can help you deal with it. Is that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's more. I mean, there's definitely stuff there. I mean, there's definitely a better understanding that people need support. And as I said, there's this counselling service. So if you are feeling stressed out or feeling, traumatized by the work, there's a counselling service. So I think Amnesty's sort of like woken up to the fact that it needs to be looked into and it needs to be addressed. But I still find people don't really talk about it. I think we need to be talking about it more, among colleagues, and I think there's a bit of a taboo about it because, you know, if you talk, it's like any kind of stress issue or well-being issue. If you talk about it openly, then people start to think, you know, they can't cope, and then maybe you'll get sidelined, or you won't get promoted, or you won't get, you know. So I think there's a taboo about it.
Right. Yeah, even like as mental health is an important issue these days, particularly during the pandemic. Now you think that it would also give the organizations that are dealing with trauma on the ground, whether it's human rights violations or humanitarian issues, that they would also see this as an opportunity to at least deal with it, and in terms of and not trying to sweep it under the rug, which is happening a lot. And in all honesty, it's also happening within indigenous peoples and organizations, and that we try to find, and I'm not going to name names, but like this, sometimes you sit down with people that you've been in the movement with for a long time, either they're young or they're old, but it is that you see there's a lot of unaddressed trauma and pain, that having to endure something that's been happening in the past, and there's no release valve. There's no ability to talk to. So some of these people, they don't have access to elders, or with some of these elders, it's still a taboo to, as you talked about it. It is to talk about things, and mostly they're told like, well, suck it up, just suck it up, and just keep going. Like, come on, we got human rights violations going on, like this, which is more evident and more important than your personal feelings. And I'm just paraphrasing, obviously, but it is, and quite frankly, I see it more with indigenous men than women. At least the people that I talk to. I'm not saying that this is across the board happening, but they're just, for the indigenous men that I've spoken with, and it's not that I dig for that, like, not that tell me your biggest pain points and all that. I'm not into that. But like, once you just talk, right? You talk story, fireside chat, whatever, and then things like these surface, and then they're often told like, you got to suck it up. It is you got to, you have things to do, you have people to defend and everything else. So like, and so, which to me is an indication that this is not just indigenous, or this is just human. This is a human problem that we need to address. The mental side of health, that we all need to start treating in a way, but first by recognizing and acknowledging that it exists. And I think that is also a big hurdle for a lot of people. Like, what is, because, and thank you so much for talking about that, because I had the assumption when it comes to human rights activists or observers, like people like yourself, that it's more of that you get the further away, and that's the truth I had in my head. So in a way, this conversation is trying to get the truth, and not just my truth. I think that is what I'm just trying to learn, because I'm a moron 100%, and in so many ways. So no. So what is the you talked about there's a difference and some commonalities between humanitarian workers and human rights observers. Like, can you explain that a little bit to me, if you can?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways maybe in terms of like the trauma that you experience, it probably isn't that different. But I just feel like there is more of a recognition, or maybe there's more resources. I mean, the humanitarian field is enormous, and the amount of resources which are pumped into it compared to human rights, you know, it dwarfs it. It's absolutely huge, and I think, you know, it's also, it goes with that there is therefore more resources for support mechanisms, like, you know, giving people counseling if they're suffering trauma or so on. And I suppose, you know, the humanitarian field, they're often working in war zones, so you often get people who are sort of literally coming out of a war zone. They've just seen some, you know, a school being blown up or something like that. I don't know. So I think it's much more on the agenda that, oh, you know, these people must have suffered trauma. You have a debriefing when you come back from your trip, and then maybe you set, you know, people can identify that somebody needs support or some counseling, or maybe even some time off from working in the field or something. Yeah. But so I think it's not necessarily that you're not exposed to that, but it's just more the resources which are available, and the level of understanding that something's got to be done about that.
Yeah. What I read a while ago, and which is quite interesting but also tragic to me, is that the amount of funding that is available for human rights supports, advocacy, research dwarfs when it comes to humanitarian issues. That is not even I can't remember the exact percentage. I should look it up. But it's.
I thought the UN budget. I heard it was like 2% goes to human rights in the UN budget. But I may be that was a while ago, and I don't know if that's still the case. And definitely UNDP would dwarf that in terms of the UNDP has always been huge, and you see that when you go into particular countries. Like the UNDP office will be, you know, like 200 people, and then you'll have like 2 human rights officers. So, yeah,
sharing a cubicle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. What is so, as an indigenous rights researcher that you are, like, what is still the misconception about out there that affects your work or rights? Trying to observe, monitor rights around the world.
Sorry, what misconceptions?
Yeah, they came out stupid, definitely. No, what I'm wondering is, because when you look at the budget, right? As hypothetical, we don't have like exact numbers, but like if it's the budget, UN budget for human rights is far less than the budget for development, right, or humanitarian development. You start to think that that human rights is it's nice dessert. It is something that is it is something extra that is underappreciated or maybe misunderstood. And I don't know, like that's how I feel, and I would like to check my thoughts with you in a way. So
I mean, I think that's right. I mean, the problem, I guess one of the issues is that human rights is, in terms of like the problems facing a country, human rights violations is one of the root causes. It's one of the structural causes, and those always take years, if not decades, to fix. And people are always looking for the quick fix. So I guess that one of the issues is that. And I suppose when you go into a country and I don't know, there's just been a war, or there's just been a drought or a famine, and, you know, 200,000 people are starving, then obviously you're not going to go out there and say, let's do some human rights workshops. I mean, you probably do need to do some human rights workshops, and human rights violations probably were at the, you know, they may well have been at the root of why there was a war or why there was a famine. But you go out there and you start on the immediate, fixing the immediate thing, and a human rights workshop is quite a bit cheaper to organize than feeding 200,000 people as well. So then you do the feeding 200,000 people first, and you can do the human rights workshop as an afterthought, and it's going to cost a lot less. So you don't need to allocate so much budget to it. But in terms of misconceptions, like, I don't know if, I definitely see a lot. I mean, I look at like what's going on in the UK. I mean, at the moment we are, I feel we're going through such a sort of like backward step in terms of understanding social justice, understanding human rights. Everybody's heard about Brexit and how that seems to have sort of encouraged sort of an insular feeling of like, we're just, the British for Britain, and let's just keep Britain for the British, and let's not worry about the rest of the world. The foreign aid budget has been cut massively in the middle of a pandemic, when this country is much better equipped to face up to. We've slashed the foreign aid budget so that there's even less to support. I mean, there's obviously a lot of problems with foreign aid, and you could probably have a whole podcast about that. But, and it's certainly not uncontroversial as a solution to the world's problems. But I just think that's symbolic of the insularity that is happening here. And the debate that we're also having is, human rights. Like, people see human rights as being about an obstacle rather than a good thing. Like, people think, human rights is that thing which means that we can't deport, a terrorist asylum seeker back to his own country. That's the way people see human rights. They don't see it in terms of like, that's somebody who won a case, their child who had a disability went to the European Court of Human Rights and won a case and managed and forced the school to make some dispensation for their child or something like that. They don't see it in that way. They just see it in terms of helping people who we don't actually want to help. So I don't know if that's this country, and I don't know if that translates across the world. But I do sometimes think there is a problem in trying to sell the case for human rights. I think some people don't necessarily get it. I think after the Second World War, people got it. People understood, that 6 million Jews were gassed, and that was because Hitler had his own particular view of people's rights and whether they had any or not. I think people had to flee and go to other countries, and people understood that, there are people who are really in need of asylum, and we really ought to give them asylum. But I feel that we've gone a massive step back and have failed to. We've just forgotten those lessons.
Yeah, it's. Let me ask you something that I've been, whilst you were talking, that I've been thinking about as well. Is, shoot, now I lost my train of thought. I always get this. Interesting to know what if you can, obviously, the a day in the life of Chris Chapman, the Indigenous rights advisor or researcher, because just to give you a little bit of context, when I always let people that listen very often to the podcast know, like, there's a humble community that like, hey, Chris Chapman is joining the podcast, Amnesty International, and everything else, and they're always, and these are Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, or I like to say allies. I'm like, you have Indigenous peoples and you have allies to Indigenous peoples. Because it makes it sound very weird. That are super interested, and one of the most frequently asked questions is that, like, how as the UN is a gray area for a lot of Indigenous peoples, not the inner workers, but like the machine called Amnesty International, the big machine, is also a gray area, doing a lot of great work. Very much appreciated. How does Chris Chapman fit into that? So that's what they would like to learn as much as you can share, obviously, about about Amnesty International.
Yeah, sure. So my job is sort of, there's kind of two bits to my job. One bit of it is doing my own research project or my own sort of advocacy. The other part of it is I'm supporting other teams in Amnesty doing their thing, because it's a big organization and we have regional offices all over the world and we have sections all over the world. So the sections are these sort of, they're like almost like autonomous national entities which spring up. Ideally they spring up organically, and a group of people say, hey, let's form a section of Amnesty International here, and so they spring up and they start doing their own work. So what I do is, because not all of these regional offices or sections necessarily have enough capacity to be able to hire an Indigenous rights researcher or advisor, they come to me for support, like technical support. Like this is what the UN Declaration says. This is what this is there's a special rapporteur at the United Nations, and we can put you in contact with them. So that's kind of my job, is supporting them. Now we have sections and national offices and regional offices with different levels of capacity. So actually, like the Americas team, for example, the Americas regional office have been doing Indigenous rights work for a very long time, and they don't need that much support. But I have other colleagues, and I don't think they would mind me saying this, because the colleagues who are hired as country researchers are generalists. They're expected to know everything about their country, but in terms of human rights themes, they're supposed to be generalists. So they'll be like, damn, what's this free prior and informed consent thing? How does that work? So then, my job is to help them think through that, and to explain, how it works, and what the case law is, and whether there are any cases in their country, and stuff like that. And then we have, say, our section in Australia. I had a call with our section in Australia last week. They have a team of 3 people working on Indigenous rights, who are all 3 of them from themselves from Indigenous communities. They really know what they're doing. They don't need my advice. In fact, I was going to them and saying, hey, can you help us? Can you help us with our project on mapping out the pandemic and how it's hitting communities? So it's very varied in that respect. So I spend some of my time offering support to other teams, and some of my time doing my own projects. And currently I have this, one of my projects at the moment is a research project in Democratic Republic of Congo, where I'm looking at the Kahuzi-Biega National Park and how Indigenous Twa and Mbuti people were evicted from that park when it was set up, with no compensation, no consultation, nothing, and are now living in poverty. Some of them going back into the park, and when they go back into the park, they're arrested, even shot. So yeah, that's the piece I'm working on at the moment.
Given the vast network of Amnesty International, also the how should I say it, the not so vast network that is available to several UN processes, like the special procedures, does Amnesty International, or doesn't fit it within the mandate at all, to also interact or do submissions to the special procedures, MREP, the UN system? I know that you go often to Geneva.
Yeah. It totally does. I mean, we have a team that works on in international organizations like the UN, and they all try and sort of monitor like the different calls for submissions and stuff. So actually today I was starting to work on a submission to the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, because they're going to develop a general recommendation about Indigenous women and girls. So they've got a day next week, I think it is, which is, again, it's going to be a virtual meeting, which is going to be a first day of discussion about that that general recommendation. And yeah, so I'm making a first submission to that, which is basically just sort of saying, look, it's very top line, like this is what we'd like you to address in your general recommendation. This is the kind of things we'd like to see you, and maybe these are resources. Amnesty has done this report. You could draw on this, you know. So yeah, so we definitely do those submissions. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because there's also a report, a general comment coming out of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Committee on land rights. That's also coming out, which is also also interesting. I think the deadline was end of this month, I believe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's yes, because we're working on that one as well. Yeah.
If people don't know you, they do know like the amount of emails that you send out about you blast emails out about situations that I don't know of, and by all means don't let me be your barometer for like how important an event is in the indigenous world. But you do send out a lot of information and a lot of emails out regarding indigenous issues. Is there something might be a plug for you, because I know that you might want to like reach more people? How can people it's a listserv or whatever, or reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I have not got that sorted in terms of technology at all.
Right.
So I literally just have a massive email group on Outlook. I'm not using like those
MailChimp and all these.
I just haven't got to grips with that. So I could do it. I'm not a technophobe, but yeah, I ought to do that, to be honest. But yeah, so basically, if people want to sign up to it, they would email me. It's chris.chapman@amnesty.org if anybody wants to, which I may regret like giving that out, but
okay. Do you get a lot of emails like from a please help us, like those kind of emails, or do you get
I get a lot, but it's funnily I don't necessarily get a lot of please help us. I mean, I think maybe people, their first port of call might be our country teams and the regional offices. That might be their first port of call. So I don't necessarily get a huge amount of that kind of. I mean, I do get them, but
right.
Not as much. To be honest, I would prefer to be getting them. I think because 90% of my emails are like some, the usual office things, usual kind of email that happens when you're in a big office with lots of people. You just get there's a lot of processes going on, and most of it is really important stuff, but it sometimes you have to really work hard to sift through it to go like, I don't need to answer that, this is not a priority. So I think I would say the emails are the bane of my life in many ways. I've always struggled to keep on top of that, always.
What is like your how should I say it, where do you get your information from? Because you receive a lot of emails, like just did you Google it, or obviously Amnesty International network, I would assume, because as a researcher I assume that you want to be informed as informed as possible.
Yeah, I mean it's a real hodgepodge, to be honest. I mean, a lot of it would be, some of it would be colleagues in the country teams letting me know about something that's happened. Some of it will just be stuff, it will be just, I'm on Twitter, so I'll see stuff on Twitter. I try and follow as many indigenous accounts as I can on Twitter. So I do end up seeing quite a lot. I think Twitter is actually great for that kind of thing. People are very down on Twitter in terms of, promoting a toxic sort of debate about many issues. But I think it's fantastic for that kind of thing, because I do learn stuff which is going on on Twitter, which you don't come across otherwise. Or just tradition. Sometimes traditional media. I'll find out about stuff through that as well. Yeah. But often it's people, or also people outside of Amnesty saying, "Hey, Chris, did you know this had happened? Do you know about this?"
Yeah, but I can imagine that for if there's some situation in country X, that you receive information or you see something kind of pass in your Twitter feed that like how do you curate it in terms of like make it I assume that information needs to be corroborated in some way. So do you reach out to the sources or do you cross-reference it?
I think, I mean, to be honest, if it's one of the emails that I'm sending out to my list, I don't independently corroborate it. I would go on the source. Do I trust that source?
Right.
You know, if it's just something which some person on Twitter has tweeted, and I don't know that person, and there's just a photo with it, and then I would be very wary about it. It might well be true, obviously, but I'd be very wary. But if it's a source which is well known for corroborating its own sources, then I would go with that. It's a totally different matter if I'm like writing a report, researching and writing a report. Then obviously the whole corroborating, triangulating, all of that is obviously very rigorous, and we obviously have to make sure we know what we have to have our own independent corroboration of what we're saying.
So you have your own pipeline or process procedure within Amnesty International. I'm fascinated about processes.
Oh yeah, so I mean, we to be honest, we're trying to streamline it because there's been a lot of a lot of complaints about how it's onerous. The process of like getting a report approved and getting it out there is onerous, and we are trying to streamline it. But there's a whole process. It has to go through a chain of approvals in terms of corroborating what you've said. And if you're saying, like me as an indigenous rights researcher, if I say something about, I don't know, like the prohibition of torture or something which is not exactly my area of expertise, then there'll be somebody at Amnesty that I can go to and say, look, you know, am I saying the right thing here? Is that what the law says? You know, is that what our policy says?
Right.
Can I say this?
Right. What is this is it's just fascinating. Chris, I don't know if you remember, but remember in Geneva that we had a dinner party. I think it was at Melanie's place, and we had a nice dinner. I never asked you, and this sounds stupid, and people are listening like, what the hell is he talking about? So we had a dinner. It was among friends. It was at the Human Rights Council. Decided to host. Human Rights Council, was it?
I don't know if it was MRIP or Human Rights Council, or I don't know. Yeah.
It was a mixed company though. There was a lot of different people.
It was. Yeah, it was very mixed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Joshua was there. I think. Yeah,
there was a mix of people, but I never asked you like how what you thought about the food. I think that it is crazy, but I never asked you. It's like years ago for people that are listening. It's been years ago, but it's been on my mind, so I need to get that out of my mind.
It was. I remember it being good. I just don't. What did you cook? It was a sort of a tomato-y sort of spaghetti thing, was it? Or
yes, I think it was two different things. I believe something with tomato-y spaghetti, something like a curry kind of thing, and then there was something with rice. It was the whole table was filled with stuff.
I remember being really impressed because there was a lot of people, and you just sort of magicked it out of nowhere. Like we just turned up, and it was like, we're hungry, you know, and you were just like, I'll cook something. I'll just sort of and it was like half an hour later, it was there on the table.
That's what I miss about Geneva and about the Human Rights Council. That you sit in those room 20. People that don't know, it's like I call it the Star Trek room because like the ceiling is so funky.
As long as it's not falling on your head.
Yeah. But did you see the new room that is like not new, fairly new? It's like downstairs. Like that really looks like a Star Trek room.
No, I don't think I've seen that.
Really odd. But you've been at the Human Rights Council, MRIP, and everything else, and surely, I just want to pick your brain. What you think? the state of indigenous peoples, indigenous rights in the movement. Like, I'm just curious about how you look at it. What your perspective is, vantage point maybe. Because I'm to me, it is very important that we look at things from different perspectives, and not just from the indigenous perspective, but also from NGO perspective, from human rights, humanitarian, and also from indigenous researchers' perspective that has been involved since almost like since time immemorial, from people from like yourself. So have you any thoughts about that, or observations about indigenous peoples, the movement, indigenous rights?
I think it's incredibly vibrant and healthy. I mean, like I said, I was working on minority rights quite a lot in my previous job, and we would always look like enviously at the indigenous rights movement in terms of like how organized it was and how many people there were with the expertise they had, because the minority sort of it's just not, there isn't really a minority rights, or maybe it's been a while since I've been working in that sphere, so maybe it's not the case anymore. But certainly when I was at Minority Rights Group, there was nothing like that in the minority rights movement. It was much more fragmented, and there were fewer people. You wouldn't see, like, you would go to one of the meetings. It used to be this body called the Working Group on Minorities, and you would go to that meeting each year, and it would be different people each year. So there wasn't a continuity, like people building up the experience of going to that. Now that you've got the Forum on Minority Issues, which is a bigger, sort of more prestigious body, and more people go to it. So I think probably things are changing, but I did get the feeling, I've always felt that the Indigenous caucus and the Indigenous movement at the international level is healthy and full of amazing people who have incredible expertise, going back decades, who really know their stuff and know how to lobby. The one thing I guess is that it doesn't, there are gaps, and I listened to your podcast with Helen, and I think you were Helen Tugendhat, and I think you were talking about how there are so many different processes going on, and they all require participation of indigenous peoples, and it's really hard to do that, and that's really true. I mean, I was involved in the Organization of American States, developing the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I mean, I wasn't involved. I literally, like, Amnesty felt that its role in that was literally as a sort of accessory, as sort of like providing some sort of support. What we tried to do is link up people so that at least we'd get more feedback into that process, because not many people were actually able to go. It was not a great process in terms of participation of indigenous peoples compared to the UN Declaration. It was very rushed. I mean, they'd spent a similar amount of time, and they'd spent a very long time developing the draft, and it had kind of just been forgotten about for a few years. And then Bolivia suddenly came along and said, we want to revitalize this, and really push it through really quickly, which wasn't great. And also there wasn't enough, there weren't the funds to support indigenous peoples to actually go and to be part of that process and to feed into it. I think there was something like 4 official indigenous representatives from like, South America, Caribbean, Central America, North America. It wasn't great. And I think that's one of the issues, is that there is so much going on. It's impossible for the indigenous movement to cover all of these areas. I think the American Declaration is actually great, by the way. It has gaps, but it also says some things which are not in the UN Declaration. So and the way it's also made very clear that nothing in the American Declaration can take away from the UN Declaration. So even if it has a gap, you can't use that to say, well, that right is not there.
Right. Yeah.
But you can use the pluses. You can use the strengths that it has over the UN Declaration. But yeah, it wasn't a great process.
Do we know why it was pushed so fast?
I don't, to be honest. I don't. I think maybe it was a priority. It was a political priority for Bolivia at the time. But to be honest, I don't really know. It was probably lack of funds as well, because I think the OAS has always struggled with, but like it's always had a funding crisis. It's a perpetual funding crisis. So I think it was like, oh well, we've got enough money for like 5-6 meetings, and that's it. So we really need to agree in that time, otherwise forget it.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I think the point that you made is a very relevant one, and I had some conversation last week, because right now the UNFCCC, the climate change branch of the UN, has its subsidiary bodies meeting. So in Indigenous Peoples, we have caucus meetings, and albeit virtual, not the same. And you can already see it's hard to strategize. Different time zones, the engagement is not as what it used to be if we still would be in Bonn. So we try to meet, we do try to coordinate, and we have some side conversations. And one of the conversations that I had was really that we're creating all these new amazing platforms, these new amazing processes, which is important. It is to the to the benefit of Indigenous peoples. It is to the benefit of the declaration of people that went before us. However, there's also an moment, as in, we're creating all these platforms. However, we're afraid that we don't have the stamina to continue these platforms or these new processes, or there's people in the movement are getting old. There's also a legitimate fear, I would say, if I look across the board in all regions, that there's not much. There are people that are coming in, but like you said, continuity is super important, and you do see Indigenous youth or new Indigenous people to the movement or to the MRIP or whatever, and they come in and they stay for one session, and they come back. They don't come back, and I think that is, so it brings a disturbance into the, almost to say disturbance in the force. Like I watched too many Star Wars movies, but it is, there's a balance, right? Like you create these new processes, but need also to be able to back it up in terms of capacities and personnel, or people that are wanting to step into the process. So that's, I don't know, I've been told I'm not youth anymore, which kind of hurts. It kind of hurts, because there are people in their 20s now, and they like, and so I'm a little bit in that in between generation. I'm the current wave, and not in the new part of the new wave, so to say. But people, the veterans in the movement, they're retiring or not with us anymore, and then there's the new wave. It's not as consistent as it was. Like there's not many people joining the ranks. So which is also, and this a very frank observation from for some people, from the veterans out there. It is also important to take someone under your wings, and then help them go through the motions. And some of them didn't do that, and now you see the huge gap that is being left behind. So in a way, just to echo what you said, it is that there's all these different processes that are emerging, and we're finding out. And because traditional knowledge is making a huge influx, there's a lot of interest suddenly in traditional knowledge. Biggest fear right now for Indigenous peoples, right now, is on traditional knowledge, because it is super sexy right now. UNFCCC initially wanted to create a database, but it's now turned into a platform and a portal. But initially, there was the idea to have a database of traditional knowledge. WTO wants to do it. There was an idea under the oceans negotiations to do it, to have it as well. CBD. So you see that there's this emerging interest in traditional knowledge, and so now we have to shift gears and trying to make sure that that we do participate in these processes, but most of these processes we don't know about. There's some processes that are ongoing that affect the rights of indigenous peoples that include traditional knowledge, but we don't know about it. And that is, one of the, I don't know who said it, and that quote can go both, can be interpreted in two ways. The most dangerous battle that you're in, the most dangerous battle is the battle that you don't know you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
And I think so. And as these things are emerging all over the place, like it's like a chess board, right? And you see all these moves that are being made, and we're still focused on like, all right, how are we going to move this pawn? Whereas other things are moving. So I don't know. It is, I don't know. It's just my observation. I'm in no way an authority on for the entire indigenous movement, but it is being involved in all these processes. You do see patterns emerge that are good, but what I just said now is one of the patterns that are not likely to be helpful for indigenous peoples.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, I don't know enough about these processes. I haven't been following the UNFCCC closely. I mean, it seems like very hard and very complex to follow, but I think you're absolutely right there. It is, and that's the problem, isn't it? And they do seem to be multiplying. These processes do seem to be multiplying. There's more and more of them. And as you say, the older, we're losing activists. I hope we're gaining activists as well. I mean,
I hope so too. Yeah,
we must be, but yeah.
It's the biggest reason why I do the podcast. And not to pump smoke on my own ass, but it is, just to document and just what's going on, and having frank, honest, open conversations so people have an idea. For me, it is important that people have an informed, and they can make their own decision. So, the new social media platform, Clubhouse. It's Clubhouse.
I've heard of it.
Audio.
I've never.
All right.
Yeah,
social media. Keep it that way. For obvious reasons. It can be addictive, but the thing is, it is social media audio only. But there are indigenous peoples on it, and as soon as there's a they create their own conversation, and no, sorry, I should say differently. There was a question: what do indigenous peoples want to come out of COP26, Glasgow, this year? Some indigenous representatives were invited. I was invited myself, also invited to talk. So we spoke a little bit, and there was indigenous people, because it's open, and some representatives were joining the conversation to listen in, and then you can ask to join the panel, and then you can talk. Most of them were like, so this is our space. When you talk about indigenous peoples, this is only our space. Which goes to a certain extent, I agree with them. As in, when you talk about indigenous peoples, the best people that can talk about indigenous peoples are indigenous peoples themselves. The premise of this conversation was different, though. This was, all right, let's get it out there. Let's learn. Let's see what are the views. And this is not about people were getting defensive, as in like only indigenous peoples are allowed to talk about indigenous peoples. I think allies can talk about indigenous people as well, as long as they include indigenous peoples. So not be that like, or let me talk about indigenous peoples because I've been in Asia for so long, and look, those people like those people are there. However, it depends. It depends. The attitude that you bring to the table depends on the atmosphere of the conversation, I believe. So, yeah. So in a way, and again, I'm trying to lose train of thought there. Yeah, and I think that is why I do the podcast. I interview people like yourself, Helen, and I have so many more. I have UN negotiators coming up on the from Geneva, Bonn, New York. Yeah, like to yeah, just they want to share, and I'm interested because we need to learn. We need to hear it all, and then you can make your own opinion about it. So that's why people like yourself, and I'm always super fascinated by people that are on the background doing the work, but they have a story to tell. Like they have a big they have their own experiences and everything else, and yeah, I don't know. It is. That's why I did the podcast, and that's why to answer you, not even answering the question, but to echo what you said, is that I do hope that people listen to you or to you talking, they want to be a researcher or are researchers, and like, all right, this is how Chris does it, and I like how he does it, or it is in a way respectful of, or no, in a way it is respectful of indigenous peoples. You know about FPIC, you know about indigenous rights, and I think that is important, that that people are in a way inspired or motivated to or empowered maybe to learn from you through your yeah, I don't know, because you yeah, sorry, I when I get excited, I just work up, and then I lose my train of thought, and I just plummet. I don't know what's going on, but it is yeah. Just wanted
But
to.
I think it's really valuable. I mean, I remember, like, I'm addicted to podcasts, by the way. I think podcasts are, it's almost like revolutionized the way I listen to news, the way I hear about stuff, and you know, you were asking where I get information from, like about things happening in affecting indigenous peoples. I've looked on podcasts for podcasts about indigenous peoples' rights, and there's almost nothing out there.
Yeah.
So I think it's really valuable and really important what you're doing, and it's really needed. Yeah, because you know it's one of the ways, I do believe it's one of the ways people that we're going to be getting our information. And you know, you can sort of listen to a podcast pottering about in the garden or doing the washing up. You know, it helps. It's a really amazing way of finding out about stuff. And yeah, it's important that we have podcasts about indigenous people's rights.
There's one part is going to emerge that, or like they already have just now started it, or they're going to start it. TV Indigena, based out of Panama.
Okay.
So they do mostly Facebook lives and YouTube lives, but they're also going to transition to podcast.
Right.
Which is mostly Spanish. So I don't know how good your Spanish is, but definitely better than mine.
Yeah, speak Spanish.
Yeah. But they're also going to transition or pivot. No, sorry. They're going to also add TV Indigena English. That's what they're also going to do. So it's like you have Al Jazeera and then Al Jazeera English. Not that that's a good comparison, but like they're also going to yeah. So like I like to see. I think it's important that now that there's podcasts and YouTube and everything else, that indigenous people should be using that more. So yeah, I don't know. Chris, yeah, it's okay if I ask you like some final questions, because I know you're a busy man. It's okay if I ask you some final questions that could be interesting. At least, no, I think that I hope they're interesting.
Sure.
Right, you're IP rights researcher, advisor, previously worked for Minority Rights Group, and current Amnesty International. Is there anything other and different profession that you, other than you have right now, that you would like to attempt?
In the future?
Yeah, or hypothetical, that could be.
Yeah. I kind of want. I love writing, so I have a dream of like just writing a book or something, whether it's non-fiction or fiction. Yeah, that's just something I want to do. But whether I have to wait until I'm retired before I do that, I don't know. But that's something I fancy doing. Yeah, because I read a lot. I read a huge amount, so I kind of from that I kind of felt that I wanted to write as well.
What is the if you do at all, what is the book that you most have gifted away?
Gifted away. Well, there's a novel called The Confederacy of Dances, which is it's by this guy called John Kennedy Toole, who wrote it and then didn't get it published and got really despaired and very sadly committed suicide. And then afterwards it was published. It's such a bizarre, surreal, crazy, funny book. I've read it a couple of times and I've given that to a few people. I really love that book. I'm trying to think what else. In terms of non-fiction, I don't know. I think I've I don't know. It's a good question. I think I give different books to different people because I kind of think, what would that person like? You know, would they like this? Would they like that? I can't think right now. I think right now I read a book called The Annihilation of Caste, which is by Ambedkar, who's like the big caste activist around the time of Gandhi, and he wrote this book about how to annihilate, get rid of caste from the Indian sort of culture. And the book is published together with it's almost two books in one because it has another introduction by oh my god, I'm going to forget her name now. It's right there. Sorry. The introduction is by Arundhati Roy. I should have been able to remember her name. Anyway, it's like the introduction is 100 pages long, so it's like two books in one, but it's one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read, and I think that would probably be my new favorite book to gift away.
Ah, nice. What is your favorite word?
Word?
Yeah.
My favorite word. There's a Spanish word, otorrinolaryngologo.
Otorrino.
Because it has an amazing sound to it. It means ear, nose, and throat specialist.
So
it's just funny. It has a great sound to it, I think.
So what's the word again? So I can pronounce it right. Otorringo and then
otorrinolaryngologo.
Oh, otorrino.
Laryngologo.
How did that become your favorite word?
I don't know. I think I was just walking around a town somewhere in Central America, and I just saw it on the front of a building, and I thought, wow, you know, that's great.
Right. Well, because I see you wearing amazing, sounds like very high-end headphones. What is the sound that you love the most?
The sound that I love the most.
Or music. Maybe that's easier.
Well, last year I had. Last year there was a blackbird in a tree, at the back of my house, and it was basically there for because it was lockdown. I was here all the time, right. And that blackbird was in the tree all the time for about 2 months or 3 months or something, and then suddenly it just disappeared. I guess they fly off somewhere probably, but it was amazing. I mean, they sing these really complex songs. It's never the same thing. it follows a kind of a pattern, but it's never quite the same thing. But it was really nice just to listen to that, like during. It was the weather was also amazing during lockdown last year, so it was quite nice.
Huh. Yeah, there's this. The funny thing is, during the lockdown, you appreciate the small things. At least that's what my experience was.
No, that's right.
Inside, and you appreciate the small things in life that are underappreciated, I would say. All right, Chris Chapman, if you could go back to your 10-year-old self, back in time, and could tell your 10-year-old self anything, what would it be?
Just chill and everything will be all right. Because I think at that time, I as a kid, I think I just stressed about everything, and I just thought the world was a difficult place, and I was anxious about everything. And I think, yeah, I would love to be able to tell myself that, just take it easy. Things will probably work out okay, and some shit will happen to you, but some. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your podcast.
No, please do.
But some good things will also happen. So just, take it easy.
That's very good advice, especially for 10-year-olds that are so concerned with everything that's going on. If you could witness one thing in history, what would it be?
I would probably go to like one of the first gigs of a band, like either the Doors or the Velvet Underground or somebody like that. I think that would just I don't know if that counts as history, but it's cultural history. I think that would have been amazing to witness that.
Are Indigenous peoples using Amnesty International enough?
I think a lot of Indigenous peoples don't know anything about Amnesty International. Like you were saying about the UN, they probably, they definitely don't. I think, I don't think they do, but then, many Indigenous peoples might well think, what can Amnesty International do for me? I'm just going to go to the capital and lobby those decision makers, and I don't need Amnesty International, which is also cool. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I think I would like people to know that we're there, but then and I think many people don't, and they don't even have that option. But at least know that we're there, and then they may well decide if they need us or not.
Right, and by lack of better formulation, and please don't pin me on it. What can Amnesty International do for Indigenous peoples? I'm asking this in the most respectful way, not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, often nothing. I mean, because we're not the decision makers. We and sometimes people do have high expectations of what we can do, and it's usually when I'm interviewing people, like people about human rights violations, like the first thing I say is, look, don't have high hopes, because we're not the people taking the decisions. But I guess sometimes people just want to get their story out there, and I really found that, like, sometimes when you do interviews and then you'll hear back, like you'll meet the same person like a year later or something, and they'll go, you didn't use my story, I wasn't in your report, and they're really upset about it. And I get that, but I think initially I didn't realize like how important it is for people just to have their voice heard. That's really important. I mean, I guess that's the first thing, but then, I mean, if we're lucky, we can maybe join the dots and just increase that pressure just a little bit on the government to make a change in a situation. And I think that does happen in some cases. I mean, obviously, if I didn't believe that, then I wouldn't be able to carry on with the job. It would be too depressing. But hopefully in some cases we can help in some way.
Right. What's a plan for Chris Chapman's idea of world domination?
I definitely do not have a plan for world domination. I think that would, I don't have a plan for world domination. Yeah, not even in my fantasies. But I don't know. But in terms of just like what the world should, where the world should, I don't know. I think that we need to stop thinking about making money all the time. I mean, it's I think it poisons everything. But then I think in my old age I'm becoming more of an old Marxist. No, I don't know, I don't know if that's the solution, but yeah, it sounds a bit pie in the sky.
No, when it comes to maybe world domination is a very weird phrase to use. It is my weird way of asking. No, maybe I just ask a question. Is like, all right, what is the future of Chris Chapman? Like, what is something that you still want to do or achieve? And I apologize for world domination, by the way.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, in ways, I think I would love to. In some ways, like I find the work that I do, I find I'm too atomized. I'm just going in too many different directions at one time, and that's the nature of the work. You know, I'm asked by the Americas team to input on a text that they're writing. I'm asked by another team to help with some advocacy or design a research methodology. So it's inevitable, and it's also great because it means that my day is really varied and I'm never bored. But I dream of sort of being able to devote myself to one situation and just being able to throw everything at it. Right. Because I think sometimes that's the human rights movement is sometimes guilty of that. We try and do everything, and everything is a little bit just too superficial. So I would love, I mean, just as an example, last year I listened to a podcast which was about a Black African American in the US who was accused of a murder, and he spent 20 years in jail. He had 6 trials, and you know, they say you can't be tried for the same thing twice, but by some weird judicial irregularity he was tried 6 times and never found guilty, and eventually they realized it wasn't him and they let him go. But the podcast told his story in great detail, like over like 20 episodes or something. It's by a news organization called APM. It's a really amazing podcast. And I do believe that podcast was a large part of why he was eventually let go. He was eventually acquitted. I mean, he wasn't even acquitted. They just gave up trying to take him to court. You know, they gave up. They just dropped it. And it was just the depth of work they did on that case. It was extraordinary. The research they did, going to, you know, digging out files in abandoned courthouses. It was extraordinary. And I dream of being able to sort of devote myself to one issue like that and just really throwing everything at it. Because I think sometimes that's the really tough nuts, like say, you know, I don't know, the Chittagong Hill Tracts, those kind of really intractable, really terrible cases of systematic, gross human rights violations. I think you're not just going to crack that with writing one report or doing an article or something. You need a systematic approach to it, throwing everything at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but yeah.
No, yeah. All right, final question, which is a little bit of a historical hypothetical. All right, let's say you had your previous career choices, right? Now you're Indigenous Peoples' rights researcher and advisor. Let's say you did not become that, but one of your previous career choices, what would have likely been your profession at this point?
You mean something that I did before, which I could have continued doing, or something that I didn't? Okay. I don't. Yeah. No. I think the ones that didn't work out, didn't work out for a reason. Like, I was actually a chef at one point, like you. But yeah, that didn't work out. I realized that I'm the kind of cook who likes to spend 2 hours in the kitchen drinking a glass of red wine, putting some music on, and dinner will probably arrive 2 hours later than everybody was, you know, than I told people. And that doesn't work in a professional kitchen. So that didn't work. I was a translator for a while, which was fine, but you're translating mainly technical texts, and it's quite boring. Yeah, what else? I played drums in a post-punk band. That was great fun. But the band split up, as those bands generally do. So yeah, I think it all happened for a reason, and I don't think it was going to continue.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a reason for it stopping.
No, appreciate it. It's always, it's not a way of, it's not dwelling, but it's like yeah, like sometimes it's interesting to think a little bit about the road you didn't travel on.
Yeah.
Don't think too much about it though, because otherwise you can veer off into one utopian or dystopian idea of the world that could have been. But yeah, it is always interesting to, it is a question that I sometimes ask to, as in, people make choices, and it's also interesting the choices they make and why people make those choices.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for talking to me. I know you're super busy with Amnesty International. Right before we got on the call, I received like 1 or 2 emails from you as well. So like, so you're super busy. Just let me know if there's in any way that I can support your work. Very glad to help you. You're a friend, and hopefully one day back in Geneva, and hopefully Melanie is Melanie, if she's okay with it, that we still can have this amazing dinner conversation, or maybe that you can share a recipe of your life as a vegetarian chef.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. I look forward to those evenings in Geneva again. I really do.
Yeah, me too. Let's hope that they will come back sooner than later. All right, Chris, thank you so much for your time, and have a great evening over there.
Thanks, Ghazali. Thanks a lot. It was, I enjoyed it. Cheers.
All right, cheers. Thanks.